The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. For a whole generation of gamers, this was an introduction into the RPG or role-playing game genre, and it opened up a whole world of fantasy and science fiction adventure games that followed. Depending on your age, either Skyrim, Oblivion or Morrowind, definitely one of the three, has probably had a big impact on what kind of games you've come to enjoy and love. And if by chance you've never played Oblivion, then you might want to give it a go by the end of this video. Ahoy everyone, I'm Nazir North and welcome to the channel. Today we are travelling back in time 18 years to play Oblivion. Developed by Bethesda and released in 2006 on PC and Xbox 360, the fourth entry into the Elder Scrolls series was an instant hit. It sold over 3 million copies in its first year and had high ratings across the board. It went on to win a stack of Game of the Year awards and had two very successful DLCs, the Knights of the Nine and the Shivering Isles expansions. These both set the DLC formula that would continue to be used in games like Fallout 3, 4 and New Vegas, as well as in Skyrim. There were also a number of smaller DLCs released for Oblivion, including some player homes and a horse armor DLC, although we don't talk about that one. So the question we are asking in this video is Oblivion still good? And even if it's starting to show its age, is it still worth playing today? Now you can pick it up for pretty cheap on Steam these days and it will run pretty well on even lower end modern PCs. Before making this video, I hadn't played Oblivion since I was a teenager, so I was really curious what the experience was going to be like jumping back into it after so many years. I fired up Steam, set Oblivion to download and jumped straight in. I was instantly transported back in time by the soundtrack and the aesthetic of the game. The nostalgia hit me hard. The main riff in the soundtrack is of course the same music used in Morrowind and Skyrim, but here in Oblivion it's all brass and orchestra, whereas in Skyrim it's that sort of male voice choir. I actually think this version might be better, I'll reserve full judgment though. Starting a new game, there is a short introduction video, and I actually got goosebumps from watching this again.
This is the 27th of Last Seed, the year of Akatosh 433. These are the closing days of the Third Era, and the final hours of my life.
At this point I was pumped to get back in, and yes, if you didn't pick it up, the Emperor is none other than Patrick Stewart. The game starts in classic RPG style in a prison and we get to go through the character creation screens. This is normally in an RPG where I get stuck and spend a couple of hours making the perfect character, but I decided to keep things pretty simple for this run, as we're going to focus mostly on the main storyline of the game. So I've gone with this good guy warrior build and given him a solid good guy name, Greg. Greg is losing his hair, but he's probably going to be wearing a helmet most of the time. Unlike some of the games that came after it, in Oblivion it's very true to the role-playing nature of the genre. You have no background, and at no point does anyone tell you where you're from or why you ended up in the prison. Your backstory is entirely up to you to imagine and create. You begin effectively as a blank canvas to imprint your own concept of Greg onto. You aren't forced to be the chosen one or the Dovahkiin. You're not a military veteran living in the suburbs. You can just be some guy, if that's what you want. There is a starting tutorial where Emperor Stewart himself is fleeing from some assassins through a secret tunnel in the prison, and guess what? That secret tunnel is in your cell, so it's Greg's lucky day. The guards take out some of the assassin cultists, and already I've got this sick hood to cover up Greg's baldness. Moving around, I did need to fiddle with the default controls a little bit. Like, jump was bound to the E key, for example, so I changed that to spacebar. It also doesn't seem to have native controller support via Steam. I did a bit of googling, and I think there are some ways to get the controller to work for Oblivion on PC, but it wasn't as simple as it was for most Steam games where you can just plug the control in. I did that and nothing happened. Rather than faff around for ages to try and get the controller to work, I just carried on with keyboard and mouse, as that works fine for me. Wow, Greg is ripped. Who cares about hair when you've got abs like that? Greg was clearly not idle when he was locked up in jail. He was keeping himself busy. Loading screens are a lot quicker than I remember in this game too. That's 18 years of graphics cards and RAM upgrades for you. After fighting through mostly rats in this escape tunnel, we escape with the Emperor and his guards. But sadly, Emperor Stuart is killed before the end of the tutorial, and he asks us a favour: deliver his necklace to his secret heir to the throne, his long-lost son. That heir happens to be Sean Bean, and spoiler alert, he doesn't survive the main plot either, but we'll get to that later. At this point, you also get to choose a star sign, as the Emperor is clearly into his horoscopes. There is a standing stone mechanic in Oblivion as well, although in Skyrim they decided to merge the standing stones and the star sign mechanic into the same thing, although I think some of the charm of this system in Oblivion was lost there in the later game. Oblivion really is an interesting bridge between your old school and modern style RPGs. Just looking at the artwork here makes that clear. Well, despite our best efforts, the Emperor dies and we escape into the sewers and eventually out into the wide world. But first we get to customize or choose our class. That is just a neat way to get some boosts to your choice of starting stats. I've decided to make a custom class which is all around melee and heavy armor, and I've just called it the Greg. Are you sure you want to be a the Greg? Why, yes I am. This moment hit me hard. I'm reminded of the first time I ever played this game and finished the tutorial. You are now just free in a massive open world, free to go wherever you want, following the main quest or just completely ignoring it. There are very few games that have such a breathtaking moment like this. It's like when you get your starting Pokemon and first venture outside of Pallet Town, or when you leave the vault in Fallout and survey the wasteland for the first time. There really is something special about these kinds of openings to games. Something I think Skyrim didn't actually capture quite as well. In Skyrim you are the chosen one from the beginning of the game, the Dovahkiin or Dragonborn, destined to save the world. And while the dragon shouts are undeniably very fun to use, I don't like the chosen one as a plot hook. In an RPG, you should be free to choose your own path, and to have decided and made up your own background. Fallout 3, I think, did this opening scene very well. Exiting Vault 101 at the beginning of the game has this exact same effect. And I forgot how big the map was in Oblivion too. I wish there was a way to zoom out though. I remember the actual disc version of this game that I got way back when on the Xbox 360 actually came with a big poster-sized fold-out map of the whole world. That was pretty cool. From the sewers, Greg decided to stock up in the Imperial City, the capital of Cyrodiil, and then head out to look for Sean Bean. Although Greg is pretty poor, I did steal some armor to get me started. You can still drag owned items in Oblivion, but unlike in Skyrim, it's considered a crime. So you can't just drag items into a dark corner and then yoink them for yourself when nobody's looking. I can, however, drop armor that I actually own and use that to jostle things around a little bit. Anyway, on the road, our first lead is to a chapel full of monks, which is actually a cover for an organisation known as the Blades, the elite force of bodyguards tasked with protecting the Emperor, although they haven't done a very good job recently. Once we get to the monks, our mate here, Joffrey, tells us that Sean Bean, the heir to the throne, is in a town called Kvatch, and that his name in the game is Martin, not Sean Bean, unfortunately. Great haircut, by the way, Joffrey. Arriving at Kvatch, this is where the story really opens up. This town has been destroyed by monsters that have come through from the realm of Oblivion through an Oblivion gate. Oblivion is this otherworldly hellscape full of these demon-type monsters, and the only way to close these gates is to hop through to the other side and take out the batteries, or the sigil stones as they're called. I do really love how the sky and atmosphere changes as you get close to the gates as well. It's a nice touch. One thing I was a bit worried about returning to Oblivion from newer games like Fallout 4 and Starfield was the combat, but I actually found it to be refreshingly fast-paced. Weapons swing far faster in this game than they do in Skyrim, for example, and enemies hit pretty hard. Blocking and managing your fatigue or stamina is really important. In Oblivion, unlike the later games, every swing of your weapon costs stamina, and the lower your stamina, the less damage you do. Certain attacks, like unarmed strikes with your fists, deal damage directly to stamina as well as health. So when your stamina hits 0, you collapse onto the floor and you have to wait for your stamina to recharge. It's a really dynamic system that now that I'm experiencing it again, I'm a bit disappointed they left it out of Skyrim, but it was probably all in the name of simplification of mechanics. Archery though works basically the same as it does in Skyrim, but magic is quite different. Back in Oblivion, magic didn't take up a slot in your hand. You can always have an active spell equipped. It doesn't prevent you from wielding a sword and a shield, for example. Both of your hands can be occupied and you can still have a spell ready to go. However, spell power is reduced based on how much armor you're wearing, so optimal mage builds in this game will likely want to wear clothing items rather than pieces of armor. It's an interesting and unique system, and I don't dislike what they did in Skyrim. It's just quite different. And once the Oblivion Gate is dealt with, we mop up the remaining monsters in town, grab Sean Bean, tell him yes you're the Emperor, etc, etc, and we get him out of the war zone. Somewhere along the way we also leveled up. In this game you have to sleep in a safe bed to actually level up. You can't just do it out in the wilderness. The way leveling up works in Oblivion is you have skills like blade, acrobatics, alchemy, etc that level up as you play. And then you have ability scores like strength, willpower and endurance. It's a very similar format to tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons. We can select some main ability scores to increase when we level up based on the skills we've used recently. Skills then automatically unlock perks when you reach levels 25, 50, 75 and 100. Okay, so once Sean Bean is safe, it's back to the chapel to see the monks again, but the cultists have beaten us there. We learn throughout the plot that the necklace that Patrick Stewart gave us is actually very important, not just a family heirloom, and it has some magic in it that was actually preventing this Oblivion apocalypse from happening. And now that there is no emperor on the throne, thanks to the cultists, the Oblivion gates are popping up all over the place. And we find at the chapel that the cultists have stolen the amulet. But before we can worry about that, we need to get Sean Bean somewhere safe, so it's to the Blades Fortress we go, called Cloud Ruler Temple up in the mountains. Alright, it might be a bit of an elephant in the room for some of you, so let's address the graphics. In 2006, when this game was released, it looked pretty good for the time, but let's be honest, by modern standards, the people do look a bit like potatoes. But it doesn't really hamper the game that much at all. After about 15 minutes of playing, you sort of forget about it, you just get into it. And let's remember, graphics aren't everything. Look at something like Undertale, Terraria or RimWorld. Sometimes simpler is better. And even if the graphics did bother you with this game, it still has a very big and active modding community, so you can mod to your heart's content to get this game to look however you'd like it to look. And just a quick reminder, if you are enjoying this video so far, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, Nazir North, to see more content like this. Okay, back to the video. After getting Sean Bean to the fortress, the next quest is to go and track down the cult and find the amulet. But first we do get some cool Blades armor of our own. That's certainly an upgrade for Greg. To unravel the cult, we first need to collect a bunch of books, 4 volumes in total. As we work on that, let's have a quick chat about the UI, the user interface. It's a parchment journal style, and it reminds me a lot of character sheets from tabletop RPGs. It's really colourful, has a lot of images and icons, and it's certainly far more interesting than the very bare bones UI in Skyrim, at least on the console version. The PC version is a bit better. The quest journal and the map leave a little to be desired, like you can't zoom out on the world map, for example, but I really do think that the inventory, spell lists and stats pages are really cool, and I do think we've lost something with the later games there. Once we collect all 4 of the cultist books, we can now find some clues which leads us to the cultists' hideout. It's a little bit of a trek, so Greg is going to borrow this host to help us get there. I think the game expects you to talk your way through this place, but they ask you to hand over all your items and put on their cultist robes. And I just don't think Greg would go for that. I mean, he walked in full Blades gear. That should have been a dead giveaway to the cultists. We aren't going to leave any of these guys alive. So we go through this place, we kill a bunch of cultists. Not that one though, he was killed by his own mate. And then we get to another book. This one is called The Mysterium Xarxes. That is a fantasy-sounding book name if I've ever heard one. We also free this naked lizard guy who was a prisoner, I guess. Maybe the dialogue would have explained that if I'd actually bothered to listen to anyone in this place. And he, of course, just runs off without saying anything. You're welcome, I suppose. There are a few more cultists to deal with on the way out. Our lizard friend actually lends a hand here and there. And then it's back to the Blades Fortress with the new book. Next, there is a fairly short quest to deal with a few of the cultists that have set up in a nearby town, but nothing Greg and his sword can't handle. Now, in regards to game performance, up until this point it was actually perfect, dare I say flawless. Loading screens were super quick and I hadn't seen any real issues. But this is where I hit my first problem. There was this one particular door in a tunnel underneath this town that crashed my game whenever I tried to go through it. Not a big issue, I could backtrack and go a different way, but a bit of a frustration. I don't remember this ever happening on console though, so maybe this is an issue specific to Steam, or maybe just my save file, who knows. Anyway, next order of business is to get our hands on a Daedric artifact. If you've played Skyrim or any of the other Elder Scrolls games, you know this means going to a shrine of one of the Daedra and doing a little quest for them. We pay a visit to the shrine of Azura and do her relatively quick quest involving some vampires. Now, given what we'd gone through so far, I thought a handful of vampires would be no match for Greg, who was level 4 by this point. But it turns out I was severely underleveled for this mission. I was forced to try and use a fire spell that I didn't even know I had to take out the first vampire, as my sword was just not cutting it. No pun intended. Then I had to employ the age-old tactic of running away. They gave chase, and one even decided to follow me through a nearby Oblivion gate. And the other one got a bit distracted outside too, so I was able to take them down. Divide and conquer. I repeated this process for the last 2 vampires with a little help from a demon guy, and we're all done. That was actually the hardest quest I did in this entire playthrough, harder than anything in the main story. Our reward for completing this is Azura's Star, which we will go back and give to Sean Bean. Then we have one more gate to close nearby with the help of some guards this time. Our next task from Emperor Bean is to grab some old armor from a crypt, so some classic dungeon crawling. This place was full of undead, including some ghosts which are weak to silver in Oblivion, so I switched over to a silver longsword for most of this quest. Once we have the armor, we have one more fetch quest to grab a special stone, and then it's another venture into Oblivion for a special sigil stone this time. This is the last thing Sean Bean needs to complete a ritual to open a portal to the place where the cultists have hidden the amulet. Alright, by this point in the game, the nostalgia was starting to wear off, and I'm starting to miss some of the quality of life improvements we see in later games. Enemy markers on the compass, for example, are very useful, or even just some kind of directional marker on the HUD would be great. I've lost count now of how many times in Oblivion I couldn't rest or fast travel because there were supposedly enemies nearby, even though there was no sign of them. And while I think the dungeons are actually better designed in Oblivion than in Skyrim, their size makes me really miss the sprint button. In Oblivion there are only 2 ways to get faster. The first is to grind your athletics skill, bicycle, as the higher that is, the faster you move, or the second is to use a horse, which of course you can't use indoors anyway. The leveling system also feels pretty dated. The modifiers you get can go up to a +5 for each ability score, but it's actually quite difficult to gain a +5 if you're just playing the game casually. You'd have to intentionally grind certain skills and ignore others if you want an optimal level up, with 3 +5s for example, the best outcome you could get when you level up. And there is a hard level cap in the game as well, so if your leveling isn't well optimized, you might never reach 100 in some of your ability scores. And while we're talking about leveling, although I don't think I've come across many in this run, some items you receive, say as quest rewards, are locked at the level you receive them. So a sword that might do 25 cold damage if you pick it up at later levels only does 5 cold damage if you find it at a lower level. I can see the case for this in sense of game balance, but it disincentivizes you from going after those cool items until you're already at a high level. Otherwise you are stuck with the weaker version for the rest of the playthrough, and by the time you reach that high level you might not even want to use the item anyway, you might have something better. And level locked items isn't an issue exclusive to Oblivion either, you do also get this in Skyrim. And I know that all of this can actually be changed and improved with mods, and I think if I was going to start a new run after this video, I would definitely pick up a few quality of life mods to improve a little on the vanilla game experience. But that being said, the game is still very playable and very enjoyable as it is. The top things on my list to bump it up a bit would be a mod or whatever tweak you need for controller support, a fix for the item and player leveling systems, and then maybe some graphical overhaul mods, but that would be lower priority for me personally. Okay, back to the storyline. Now this is the part where you are meant to travel around the land and convince other lords to send aid to help this city, but I think Greg can do this on his own. This quest has two things that gamers hate the most: a protect the NPC mission, immediately followed by a stop the bad thing before the timer runs out mission. The one thing I can't work out in this battle is why Sean Bean, who has been made temporarily killable just for this quest, normally he's story essential and completely invincible, why he doesn't have a helmet on, and why he's using a dagger as his main weapon. Is that correct, or is that because I looted a bunch of weapons from the Blades HQ earlier? Who knows. Anyway, neither the protect or the timed mission are that difficult, and Greg flies through them both. And pretty soon we are ready to get the amulet back. There were quite a lot of casualties though. Joffrey, Bird, Boris, basically everyone you work with to progress through the main storyline. I'm not sure if their deaths are scripted here or if I could have saved them if Greg was a bit faster or got more help from other towns. Oh well. Through the portal, we can now go to the realm of Mankar Cameron, who is the cult leader, voiced by none other than Terrance Stamp, who was General Zod in the 70s and 80s Superman movies, and was the Prophet of Truth in Halo 3, another great game from the Xbox 360 era. Now, this place is a bit weird. It's half lush paradise, half Oblivion Demonland. But we progress through, and as with the cult hideout, I think there are meant to be ways to talk your way through most of this area, but Greg's gonna Greg. There is a lot more cultist slaying, and then we get to our main guy, Terrance Stamp or Mankar Cameron. I think he's about to start monologuing when you first walk into the chamber, but Greg didn't give him a chance. He was just straight in there with the sword. And after everything else we've been through, he was actually a bit of a pushover. I think, in fairness, he wasn't expecting me to just run up and hit him straight away. And now that we have the amulet back, we can go back to Sean Bean, and look, he's already dressed up as the Emperor. So it's off to the capital to go through his coronation ceremony. And even though he is in a bit of a rush, I did take him shopping first. Okay, I promise Sean Bean will go to the temple. Hang on. Where's the Emperor? Oh yeah, there he is. And as a classic plot twist, as we're just about to put Sean Bean on the throne, the bad guys attack the capital city. Fighting breaks out in the streets, and we now have to escort the new Emperor to the temple. And the big bad himself, Mehrunes Dagon, who is the sort of demon lord of Oblivion, appears in physical form to join the battle. I think maybe here you're meant to do something with the Oblivion gates to clear a path, but I just sort of walked right past Dagon Dagon to progress the quest. Once in the temple, Sean Bean sacrifices himself to become an avatar of the dragon god Akatosh, and there's a pretty cool cutscene where he defeats Dagon but gets turned to stone in the process. So the Emperor has sacrificed himself to save the city and to prevent the Oblivion crisis. And as the player, as a reward for all of this, we get some snazzy Imperial Dragon armor, plus all of the Oblivion gates are closed so the land is made safe. I do wish this armor had a matching shield though, but it does have some very powerful enchantments on it. Alright, main quest done, and I did really enjoy it. The best part about this game is that the main plot that I've run through only represents about 5% of what there is to explore in this game. There are tons of guilds and factions you can join, as well as a ton of other quest lines to follow. And I see this as a positive point. Oblivion doesn't really have randomly generated Radiant quests like you get in some of the newer games. This means that every single quest you do was actually made and crafted and has some meaning and story behind it. It makes the world feel a lot more immersive and a lot more real. This is unlike those repeatable fetch or bounty quests we get in Skyrim, for example, which feel very shallow in comparison. Throughout the main quest, the plot and voice acting of the key characters is solid along with the writing, and there are a handful of big names in there in the cast. In terms of gameplay, it is showing its age, but it's still very playable. Some of it does feel a little tedious, like long walks across the countryside to get to your next quest location. But you get that in almost any RPG video game. Even in Red Dead Redemption, you spend about half of your time just galloping around here and there to get somewhere on your horse. The combat was challenging at times, but overall a little easier than the later games. This surprised me, as I remember this game being harder, but that could just be because I was much younger the last time I played it. Although one thing I do know is that playing as a pure mage class is harder in Oblivion than going straight melee. But as with Skyrim, I think the Stealth Archer is still the easiest build. Overall, I would definitely recommend this game to anyone who liked Skyrim or the Fallout games but has never given Oblivion a try. It's well worth it. And for those of you like me who may not have played it in many years, it is worth a revisit. I had a blast going through. In fact, after making the video, I'm already thinking about doing a new playthrough as a spellcaster and doing the full Mages Guild storyline, which is without a doubt far better than the Winterhold College storyline in Skyrim. Before we finish up, there is also one last feature I want to talk about in this game that I really think we should have had in Skyrim, and that is spell crafting. Just like how you can enchant weapons and armor in both Oblivion and Skyrim, in Oblivion you could also make your own custom spells. You could choose and combine multiple effects, set the range, radius and target to create some truly unique spells. It is such a great feature, something I really missed from Skyrim and something I hope they decide to bring back with the next installment in the Elder Scrolls series. If you've enjoyed this one, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel Nazir North for more content like this in the future. Cheers everyone, thank you for watching. And finally, it wouldn't be an Oblivion YouTube video without messing around with the dupe items glitch. Enjoy.
I'm only asking for enough to feed me kids.
I've been looking for you.